Wade in the water, children. God's going to trouble the water. For the African slaves here in America, the troubled waters meant the ups and downs, the vicissitudes of life. Within the context of troubled waters, these troubled waters of life, there were, and there still are, healing waters, because God is present in the midst of swirling turmoil, the troubled waters. See that ghost all dressed in white? God's going to trouble the water. The leader looks like an Israelite. God's going to trouble the water. A song, Wade in the Water, inspired by Scripture, John 5. Songs like these, known as African American or Negro spirituals, there are some 6,000 of them, were born out of the substance and the experience of American slavery. And the foundations they form the foundations for blues, for jazz, for hip-hop, gospel poems, and many of our favorite American hymns. Water is an important image in many of these spirituals. Deep river, my home is over Jordan, finds the hope on the other side of the great divide. Go Down Moses is a song that finds hope on the other side, again, of the River Jordan. And it is a spiritual of deliverance. Water was a primary aspect of the slave experience. And the slave experience began because the slave experience started and began with the Middle Passage by traveling across the ocean to a new land. The Ohio River, closer to us, in the U.S., was the dividing line between slavery and freedom, especially if you were on the Underground Railroad. Embedded in these songs is a history of African Americans in this country. It is a history of leaving home. Important to us this morning, on this first Sunday in Lent, is an exercise for us of leaving home. Practically all of us leave home. Some of us get baptized. All of us go into the wilderness. All of us, but not necessarily in that order or in a particular order, all of us at some point in our lives travel through these stages. Leaving home, getting baptized, or forming our identity, and then going into the wilderness. We leave home emotionally, we leave home physically and spiritually. We leave places familiar, places comfortable, places where things happen in a predictable fashion. We leave places also that are uncomfortable. Sometimes we dread leaving. Sometimes we cannot wait to leave. Other times we are reluctant. Sometimes we will try to avoid leaving. Sometimes we have no choice but to leave. Circumstances of life can push us out. But leaving home is a part of life, regardless of how or why it happens. Either we're ready to leave home, or home is ready for us to leave. Some of us recall that in our study of birds, there are certain species of birds who literally throw the chicks out of the nest when it's time, and they learn to fly in this process. For children, it might be the first day of school. It might be going off to a summer camp or going off to day camp. It could even be going off to the sitter's house, going off to college, or going to work. The major changes in life as we know it are all again forms of leaving home. The birth of a child, a divorce, the illness of a loved one, the death of a loved one, a new job, the loss of a job, all involving leaving home. These days, we are witness to people having to leave home, not by choice. As a result of the COVID-19 virus, some people have lost their jobs and lost sources of income, and they are forced to leave home. They are forced to experience foreclosure. or evictions. These days, or just in the recent week, we're seeing people in Texas having to leave home because of the weather and because of other inconveniences associated with the loss of electricity. This was captured by the slaves, not in terms of what we see today, but in general, what happens when we leave home. I'm just a wayfaring stranger, traveling through this land of war. But there's no sickness, toil, or danger in the bright world to which I go. Again, a song that was inspired by Psalm 137. I recall our oldest son at 1.5 years having to leave home. He had to go with a sitter because Mom decided to go back to work. On his first day, when we handed him off to the sitter, he cried and Mom cried. By the third day, when we handed him off to the sitter, he turned to Mom, smiled, and waved bye-bye. Mom cried because she thought that he had given up on her and that he didn't love her anymore. But he was gleeful, and he was glad to leave home. Leaving home, moving to a new town, retirement, the loss of our health, all bring us to crossroads, those crossroads of life. Our major decisions, again, about life are about leaving home. This can be difficult, risky, and frightening, but we're invited by God to change, to risk wading in the water, to navigate the changes that are inevitable that life gives. Retirement for some is uneasy, and I can personally attest to that. Ultimately, leaving home is the beginning of a new spiritual journey. It's a new experience for growth. This is a time when we are most vulnerable, and this is a time, leaving home that is, when we're in need of God. Leaving home and moving into new circumstances. With corporate transfers, again, I can attest, we left some 7 different homes. We sold 5 of those. Leaving home was part of our life. Leaving home is also the way of God's people. Adam and Eve left the garden. Noah left dry land for the ark. God told Abram, go from your country and from your kindred and from your father's house to the land to which I will show you. Joseph was taken from home to Egypt. Jacob ran away from home, fleeing for his life. Moses and the Israelites left their home in Egypt. Jesus, in today's gospel, leaves home to begin his ministry. Jesus came from Nazareth of Galilee to the Jordan River, leaving his home to be baptized and to stand with John in the Jordan, the border between home and the wilderness. There, he is baptized. The heavens are torn apart. The Spirit, like a dove, descends on him and then in him. And a voice cries out, you are my Son, the Beloved. With you I am well pleased. From there, the Spirit immediately drives him into the wilderness. His baptism may have happened in the river, but the new life for the baptism actually began and still begins with the wilderness. Slaves captured that, inspired by Mark 1, with a song, I wait upon the Lord. I wait upon the Lord my God, who takes away the sins of the world. If you want to find Jesus, go in the wilderness. Go in the wilderness. Go in the wilderness, leaning on the Lord. Sometimes the wilderness takes different expression, different forms. There are different circumstances. This story that we heard in the gospel is not just about Jesus. It is our story too. The Father's words refer to Jesus in a literal way, but they also apply to us. Let me tell you a story. There was a family out in Kankakee, Illinois, in our old congregation, a family of 3 girls and 3 boys. The 3 girls were from the second marriage, and the 3 boys were from the first marriage. They attended the congregation, Sunday schools, the summer reading program, the math program. They attended the after-school programs for about 2 years when the mom decided it was time for them to be baptized. The mother extended herself graciously, but then when the day came for the baptism, as the day approached, strange things started to happen. The interim pastor of that congregation could not be available. The mother's schedule had changed as she was a nurse's technician at the local hospital. Her shift changed and she was not going to be able to be there. She was devastated. We called the bishop's office, and of course he gave me permission to do the baptisms. But little did he realize it was not just one baptism. There were 10 people to be baptized. Slowly, word filtered out even to the church headquarters in Chicago, even to the presiding bishop's office. And someone said, "Whoa, we have never seen a multiple baptism like this. We better get somebody else down there." And they did. And the bishop's office, synodical bishop, sent up some people. And everything worked out well except for the mother. She was still devastated, wanting to be with her kids when they were baptized. On the morning of the baptism, we noticed 3 formal, official-looking vans. You know, the dark blue kind that pull up with the insignia of the state of Illinois on their doors. And as the doors opened, people got out of the door, came out of the vans in wheelchairs. And there they were, the wards of the charges of the mother. She was bringing them into the congregation that morning on a field trip. And they were able to witness the baptism, and she was. And as the 10 people, 6 of her kids and 4 others, approached the altar, the choir started to sing, "Take me to the water. Take me to the water. Take me to the water to be baptized. None but the righteous shall see God." Another slave song from Psalm 108. And then, in deference to the mom, one of the soloists in the choir started to sing another song. And that song was what the mother had taught her children. The Lord will make a way somehow. Like a ship that's tossed and driven, the storms of life are raging. We have to say to ourselves, the Lord will make a way somehow. Wildernesses, temptations. Is this what the holy season of Lent is about? It is no coincidence that on Wednesday we will mark with the ashes of remembrance, the dust of our creation. And today, the gospel takes us to the wilderness. Wednesday's ashes leads us to the dust, the wilderness soil. Lent is indeed about leaving home. And leaving home in life and in Lent always takes us to an in-between place. A place that some call liminarity. It is a place where new things happen, but it's also a place of neither here nor there. What we leave behind was what was not clear. But what will be clear. Things done and things left undone, we leave behind. Things said and things left unsaid, we leave behind. Our fears, our hopes, and our dreams we leave behind. Our sorrows and losses we leave behind. These are the facts of our life and the sources of our temptations. Sometimes we think about these temptations as being external to us, but temptations are really within us. We are tempted to believe more and more, and more and less, that the dust of God's creation, is what we are tempted about, but He is not. We are tempted not to trust God. We are tempted not to trust God's willingness to be bothered with the dirt and the dust of who we are. Temptation are not about rules. It's not about being good or bad. God does not tempt us to see if we will pass or fail. Temptations are for our benefits, not God. Temptations are part of our salvation. We leave home and we experience wilderness temptations to discover that our identity is as a beloved child of God, beloved children of God, and our only real home is with God. In these wildernesses, old structures, the ones we left behind, no longer are able to contain us or support us or define our lives. The wilderness is not uncharted territory. Jesus has already cleared a way and made a space for us in this new territory. Jesus has already prepared a path for us. In the wilderness, we can surrender to God our helplessness, and we can open ourselves to God's grace, and our guilt is overcome. We can return in the wilderness to the Lord our God, for He has made Himself known as gracious and merciful, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love. Like Jesus, though, we have to go through the wilderness. We have to remember who we are. The wilderness. We have to remember, coming out of the wilderness, that we are the beloved children of God. We are the beloved sons, the beloved daughters. We are those children of God. The way through the wilderness is by remembrance. Those 6 children I talked to you about were all and are all descendants of slaves. They remember their covenant with God through their baptism, and they escaped a certain path of destruction. They remembered their mother's mantra that God will make a way somehow. They remember the steps, step by step, that congregation took to help prepare them for the world. 2 of them are now high school teachers. One has published poems and is quite a poet. One who got on the wrong side of the law, and after 6 months is now working with a neighborhood association to help kids navigate the wildernesses in the inner city. 2 will be ready if the pandemic subsides. They will be ready to enter a local community college this fall. Their identity. When Martin Luther was asked about his identity, when he was challenged constantly by the church and by other political authorities, he did not attempt to define or talk about what he had done, the books that he has published, the sermons, the lectures. He simply said over and over again, I am baptized. The wilderness is so wide, you can't get around it. It's so high, you can't get over it. It's so deep, you can't go under it. You've got to go through it, as we all have to go through it. The prophet Isaiah has promised, when you pass through the waters, I will be with you. And when you pass through rivers, they shall not overwhelm you. And when you walk through fire, you shall not be burned, and the flame shall not consume you. We have to remember that we are beloved children of God. We are created in His image, and with us he is well pleased. We should let these words fill our minds and occupy our hearts, especially so during this Lenten season. Through these African American spirituals, they were born out of pain. They were born out of oppression. They were born out of a struggle of a particular people. These songs, though, have become songs for all people. And the message is clear. This Lenten season, do not shrink from moving confidently out into the choppy seas. Jesus will walk with you. Do not be afraid of the wilderness. Jesus will take your hand. Wade in the water, children, because God will always trouble the waters. Amen.